This is part of the Vietnam Insane Asylum series, Stories from the Vietnam War told by U.S. Marine and Silver Star recipient William Whorton. Whorton is uniquely qualified as a storyteller, having been both enlisted and an officer in the Marines, and doing 2 combat tours of duty there. He is fluent in several Vietnamese and Chinese dialects and has returned to Vietnam 14 times to discuss the war with old Vietnamese warriors, some he fought against. Teaching and lecturing in Asia for over 30 years, here is Horton telling his story, The Cowards.
What I had decided to do, and I had mentioned this before about I didn't understand why we were losing the war. I wrote, we're losing, but why are we losing? And this became an obsession with me. And in this obsession, I have decided that I was going to come back to Vietnam and fight again, but I was going to come back speaking Vietnamese. I was going to learn something. See, in my tour as a platoon commander, I didn't know anything about Vietnam. I didn't know anything about the people, didn't know anything about the culture, didn't know anything about the war, didn't know anything about anything. But I decided that I was going to come back and I was going to fight in the South Vietnamese army. And I wanted to go into an army command to do that because I wanted to work with helicopters. Because one of the things that we had learned in November 1965, we Marines, even though we were Marines, we were so proud of the 1st Air Cav in November 1965 for their victory down south with Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore. We knew all about that. And we were so proud of Colonel Moore. Even as Marines, we were just so proud of Colonel Moore and what he'd done. Because he had really put up a great fight down there. And so I wanted to work with helicopters. I wanted to work with the U.S. Army. And I wanted to work because I knew the South Vietnamese army was doomed. I mean, I knew the war was over. That part never left me. I knew they were doomed. But I wanted to know why. Why? They're Vietnamese, just like the North are Vietnamese. The Viet Cong are Vietnamese. But why couldn't our Vietnamese fight? So I had decided on my medevac on the way back that I was going to scheme and plan to come back as a senior battalion advisor to fight with the South Vietnamese army, and also under the command of the American Army. So I was going to be a Marine Corps officer assigned to MACV. There were very few assigned, but I was determined to become one of them, and I schemed and schemed and schemed, and I got it.
Bill goes off to the MATA course at Fortress Benning, Georgia. MATA stands for the Military Advisor Training Academy, a 6-week course which trains, educates, and develops servicemen to serve as advisors to a foreign army.
When we went down to the MATA course, this is going back to the insanity again. Now, because I spoke fluent Vietnamese, I'd been to Vietnamese language school, and I'd taken special training in Vietnamese and French and Chinese during the time that I was assigned to Washington. I'd gotten orders to go to language school. I've been to language school for 9 months. While I was at language school, I studied during the day, but I also studied Vietnamese with another Vietnamese teacher who was a master of North Vietnamese dialect. So I studied with him for about 2 years, and I studied French, and I was learning pretty fluent French, and then I've studied Chinese. I wanted to learn to speak Chinese, also Mandarin Chinese. So anyway, so when I went down to the MATA course, I'd already fluent. So Vietnamese was a large part of the course. So I had to talk to the chief of staff to get special permission not to take the Vietnamese assigned and to get special training. So I went in to see the chief of staff of the school, and the chief of staff was one of these Army colonels, airborne ranger, charismatic beyond belief. Oh, and I explained my background because I told him I loved the Army and my mother loved the Army. And he knew my mother. He knew my mother by reputation. He didn't know her personally, but he knew my mother by reputation. My mother was pretty well known So needless to say, we had a wonderful, coffee and cake and everything else, and so it was great. But anyway, we went to the MATA course, and during the course, we got all kinds of good information about what was going on in the war, and we got the units and a lot of good information. But of course, there was the bullshit, because by now it's 1968. There's been a terrible, terrible incident that has happened that I think I have to go back and explain a little bit. A terrible thing has happened. It's called Tet 1968. Tet 1968, we have to remember this. Part of the insanity of the war is we're winning. Everything that came out is we're winning the war. We're winning the war. The light's on at the end of the tunnel. We're winning. We haven't lost a battle. We're hearts and minds. The Vietnamese are learning to love us. They're learning to love democracy. They're learning to love Jesus. They're learning to love everything, about us. I mean, everything is going just great. Then comes January 30th, 31st, 1968. And over 100 population centers come under Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army attacks. All across South Vietnam, Americans, for the first time on their TV screens, they're not used to seeing helicopters blowing half of Saigon up, killing civilians. They're not showing napalm in villages with little kids coming out all burnt up and everything like that. The flag, the North Vietnamese battle flag, the North Vietnamese flag has been hanging over Hue Citadel for 6 weeks. 6 weeks before the Marines were able to drive them out. And the American casualties were terrible during this time. I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Americans were being killed. I mean, the fighting was just incredible. Here's the irony. Tet 1968 was, as General Westmoreland later said, a great military victory for the United States, because all the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese units came out of the jungles, and they were exposed to our artillery, they were exposed to our air, they were exposed to all the things that we were good at, and they took terrible casualties. But the damage had been done, because all across the screens in America, all they saw was napalm villages, kids being burnt, civilians being killed, cities being destroyed, dead Americans everywhere. And we're winning the war? So guess what? I mean, after Tet 1968, there was not one rational human being that believed we were ever going to win that war. So this is what was going on when I went to the MATA course in this was around about March 1968. So there we were attending these classes. Now, one of the things I want to mention is there was a real character in this class. His name was Captain Stanley A. Blunt, United States Army. I want people to know the name of Captain Stanley A. Blunt, United States Army, because he was one of the greatest soldiers I ever met in my life. Tremendous soldier. But he was an interesting character. I mean, he would stand up in class, and when the official party line is we are winning the war. See, this was the party line. This is the Insane Asylum. Everything and this came down from the White House. We are winning the war. That's the official party line. No deviation allowed. Everybody, all the classes at the MATA course we're winning the war. So here's Captain Stanley Blunt. When we get one of these, we're winning the war doing this, Captain Blunt would stand up, and he was easy to see from the rear. there was 4 of us Marines there. There were 4 Marines assigned to the medic course, and of course we all became brothers. There was another Marine Corps captain and two first lieutenants, and myself. So there were 4 of us there, and we 4 Marines we sat at the rear of the class, and we would watch Captain Blunt stand up, and he was easy to see because he had an incredible combat record. He'd been to Vietnam already about 4 times. Tremendous combat record. He'd had half of his left ear shot off, so when he stood up, half of his left ear, you could always tell it was him standing up because the guy standing with half an ear. And he would say, usually it was Lieutenant Colonel, "Sir, why are you lying to us this way? Why are you lying to us? Why are you telling us things that are not true?" And of course, Lieutenant Colonel would be standing up there, "Hey, you're supposed to swallow this." And Captain Blunt was going, "Sir, why are you telling all these men something that's not true?" and of course we 4 Marines were back there. We would just giggle like little girls. I mean, we were like little girls giggling. And then there came the time when one lieutenant colonel said, "Captain, no captain's going to call me a liar. You'll pay for this." And at that point, all of a sudden, there were 4, like I said, there were 4 Marines there. The other captain was senior to me by grade, senior to me by time. His name was Ron Matthews, Captain Ronald Matthews. So he gathered us together and he said, "Look, we've got to do something about this because this guy," and we got together with Blunt and we said, "Look, just swallow the bullshit. Just swallow the bullshit. We all," and you know what Blunt did? Blunt called us all cowards. He said, "Why are you so cowardly? You're just cowards, And of course, all of us had been to Vietnam before, so we all knew we were cowards. So I mean, it was okay. But anyway, it was our nickname for him was Blunt Blunt. We called him Blunt Blunt. So that was our nickname for him, Blunt Blunt. Captain Matthews said, "Look, we got to do something." And he looked at me and he said, "Bill, you know the chief of staff." He said, because the chief of staff had invited me in for coffee a couple times, talk about Vietnam and things, one-on-one kind of thing. So I had a good relation. So I made an appointment to see him. I said, "Colonel, this is kind of official this time." And I explained the situation with Captain Blunt. And I said, "Look, Captain Blunt's too fine an officer to go down." And he said, "I'm aware of the situation." He said, "Don't worry." He said, "I'll take care of it." It said, there won't be any problem. He said, "I'll take care of it." So thank God, we had a colonel who was a combat veteran that really helped out. But Blunt just continued on. But there was another thing that happened to go to the insanity of the whole thing. This is just such a great story. I've got to tell this story. At the MATA course, before we closed out, we had to get a class on reports that we would have to fill out. We would have to get a class on reports, and we had a whole bunch of reports that we had to fill out as advisors. So anyway, they had this special team fly down from the Pentagon to give us. I mean, it was a big team, very impressive. I mean, it was impressive. The briefing they gave us was just impressive. It was all, they had the slides, they had everything. It was professional to the max, but boring. God, it was boring. And it was just bullshit. Again, finally, we got to something called the Hess report. Hess report, HES, it was, I think, Hamlet evaluation system. That's what it was, Hamlet evaluation system. So finally, one officer, one Army officer, a colonel. It was a colonel who obviously was never realized he was never going to make brigadier general, and he was obviously not too happy about going to Vietnam. So he stood up, and he stood up while the briefing was going on. He said, "Do you people have any understanding of human nature whatsoever?" he said, "Are you so stupid?" And he used the word stupid. He said, "Are you so stupid not to understand what is going to happen out of all this?" He said, "I'm going to go to Vietnam. And when I arrive in Vietnam, my district is going to be crawling with commies. There's going to be a commie under every bed. And when I leave Vietnam, there's not going to be one commie in my whole district." And he said, "I'm going to take my Bronze Star or whatever they're going to hand out and go home." And he said, everybody in this room was going to do exactly the same thing. And, and of course, and then he kept going, "Are you so stupid you don't understand that?" You don't. And it was, I mean, he was really angry. And of course, by this time, the whole crowd, we were standing there going, "Yeah, right." And then, of course, the people on the stage, they were wandering. They looked like deer and a pack of wolves going at them. And then finally, the chief of staff came out. Chief of staff came out, raised his finger, said, "These gentlemen have come a long way to give you a briefing that you need for information that you'll need to know when you get to Vietnam." He said, "Now they have come a long way to perform their duty, and we are going to be polite and allow them to continue performing their duty." And then we all went, "Okay, fun's over, back to boredom." But I had to mention that story. But again, this was this is part of the insanity when mendacity rules, because there are people that will say, "No, this is not right. This is not the truth." But again, one of the things I want to point out too, when I get to Vietnam, mendacity raises its ugly head again, because when I take over my battalion, and I go up to my battalion is located on the DMZ. I am senior battalion advisor, 3rd Battalion, 2nd Regiment, Arvin, 1st Division, and my commanding general is General Ngo Quang Trung. Very famous general. He's in many of the history books, and he's always treated with great respect by all the Americans. All the Americans respected him and loved him because he was a great soldier, and I respected him greatly. I had tremendous respect for him. But as we go up there, one of the things that we have to face is I have 2 very senior officers who will remain unnamed, who drop in on my battalion on a regular basis. "How's your battalion, Captain?" And I have to go through this line of bullshit of my battalion is the greatest fighting force that ever lived, and I don't know what I'm going to do because they all want to go north and kill Ho Chi Minh and all that kind of stuff. It was now. Initially, what I did with each officer is I made one minor little defect. And their first reaction was, "Well, what's wrong with you, Captain? Dude, what kind of attitude you got? You got the right attitude here, Captain, kind of thing." It was like, "Oh, no, sir. They're my battalion's great." But I did it with both officers. I wanted to test them. And then when I knew that I could never talk to them, ever. See, that's what mendacity does. You cannot communicate. There can be no communication. That's what mendacity does.
Dear viewers, if you are like me, you cannot get enough of William Whorton stories. We have several posted already on this channel, and we have more coming. Please look at my video list on the channel and see Bill's other Vietnam War Insane Asylum videos. Thank you so much for your channel support. It is greatly appreciated. We'll see you with another William Whorton video soon.